What happens to your brain the moment you die? Science has been trying to answer that question for over 100 years. In 1950, Soviet scientists kept a dog's head alive. In 1970, an American surgeon successfully transplanted a living head onto a different body. What both governments discovered about consciousness after death was so disturbing. They classified it for over 40 years. To understand what these experiments discovered, we first need to understand what death is. This is what they found, and what it means for every human being alive today. The answer will change how you think about life itself. Title card, no narration, music only. Clinical death is when your heart stops beating and your lungs stop breathing, but your brain continues functioning for several minutes after clinical death. This discovery raised a question that terrified governments on both sides of the Cold War. If the brain remains aware after clinical death, what does that mean for science? Both the Soviet Union and the United States began secret research programs to find out. What they discovered over the next 2 decades would challenge every scientific assumption about life and death. The story begins in Moscow, 1954. Soviet scientist Sergei Bryukhonenko had spent 30 years trying to answer one question. Can the organs of a living creature survive and function completely separated from the body? His answer would shock the entire scientific world. He invented a machine that could keep organs alive outside the body, the autojector. Using the autojector, he could keep a heart beating outside the body indefinitely. But his most significant experiment came in 1954, and it was with a dog. What happened in that laboratory in Moscow would change science and medicine forever. Bryukhonenko's team surgically removed a dog's head completely from it. They connected the severed head to the autojector machine, which supplied blood, oxygen, and nutrients. What they observed in the following hours became one of the most significant and controversial moments in the history of science. The head responded to external stimuli. It reacted to light. It reacted to smell. According to documented accounts, the eyes tracked moving objects. Consciousness appeared to be present. The experiment lasted several hours before the autojector was switched off. The Soviet government immediately classified all findings from the experiment. What exactly had they discovered that required immediate classification? The answer lies in what consciousness actually is, and where it lives in the brain. Bryukhonenko's experiments suggested that consciousness does not immediately stop at clinic. If consciousness persists after clinical death, the implications for medicine were: if a patient is clinically dead but still conscious, what does that mean? The Soviet military saw different implications entirely. For resuscitation, for everything. Could soldiers be kept alive after fatal wounds long enough to complete their mission? These questions explain why the Soviet findings were immediately classified as state secret. Dr. Robert White was a neurosurgeon at Case Western Reserve University in Cleveland. Meanwhile, on the other side of the world, an American surgeon was asking the same questions.
March 14, 1970, Case Western Reserve University, Cleveland, Ohio. Dr. White and his team of 9 surgeons entered the operating theater at 6 a.m. The procedure they were about to perform had never been successfully completed in the history of medicine, a complete head transplant between 2 living subjects. The experiment used 2 rhesus monkeys. The procedure required complete vascular connection, every major blood vessel manually reconnected. The surgery lasted 8 hours and 18 minutes. Dr. White later described it as the most technically demanding procedure of his career. When the anesthetic wore off, the subject regained consciousness. The subject tracked movement with its eyes. It responded to sound. Brain function was confirmed active. Dr. White published his findings in the journal Surgery in 1971. The scientific community was divided immediately. Supporters said White had opened a new frontier in neuroscience and transplant medicine. Critics raised serious ethical questions about consciousness, identity, and the nature of human existence itself. The central ethical question was this: if you transplant a head onto a new body, which one is the real person? White himself believed the mind and consciousness resided entirely in the brain. If he was correct, the implications for understanding death were profound. If consciousness lives in the brain, and the brain continues functioning after clinical death, then death is not a single moment. Death is a process, not an event, and that process takes time, measurable, documented time. This window of time between clinical death and brain death became the focus of the most sensitive classified research. Both governments wanted to know, what is a person experiencing during that window? The answer came not from classified laboratories, but from patients who had been resuscitated from clinical death. Thousands of patients who had been clinically